Well, welcome everyone. I'm not hearing the promos, so I believe we're on air now. Hello and welcome to Whistleblower Heroes, everyday heroes and educators sharing the information that you need to know here on Revolution Radio. And I'm your host, Ella. What is a whistleblower? A whistleblower is a person who makes public disclosures of wrongdoing, corruption, and crime. These courageous people often suffer retaliatory actions because of their disclosures, but in the end, many of these people are often the catalyst for needed change and are eventually lauded as heroes. And I am here to celebrate these heroes and give them a platform because shining a light on wrongdoing wherever it occurs plays an important role in keeping society peaceful, free, and just. So today I have a highly honorable guest. I'm very excited to introduce you to Stéphanie Balique-Gibaud. She is a public relations and event marketing specialist working for UBS France in Paris. She has in particular played an important role in blowing the whistle on the practices of tax evasion and laundering of tax fraud, an organized group of UBS AG in Switzerland with the complicity of UBS France. After studying languages in Lille, France, she worked for TML, the Channel Tunnel, the Embassy of the United States of America, the RC Lens Football Club, and UBS Wealth Management in Paris. She joined UBS in 1999, where her mission was to develop partnerships with luxury brands and organize clients' events in France. She has played a key role in blowing the whistle and making public the fact that UBS AG has encouraged tax evasion and money laundering practices with the complicity of UBS France. She has been acting as a whistleblower since 2008, working with French authorities and namely the French customs. She has also been heard by the Belgian authorities, UBS Belgium, under investigation currently. She published a book where she explained the practices of UBS, and it's titled The Woman Who Knew Too Much. She received the Anticor Ethics Prize in January 2015 before being invited to testify by the Tax Ruling Commission of the European Parliament in Brussels. In 2015, she was officially invited to an audition at the Embassy of Argentina in Paris by Ricardo Echagare, Minister of...
Minister of Finance.
I'm sorry?
Minister of Finance, yeah.
Minister of Finance. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming on and agreeing to coming on the radio show. Is there anything you wanted to add to the bio or correct any information that may be inaccurate?
No. It's perfect. You have summarized who I am. So no, it's perfect.
Okay, wonderful. So I guess let's start at the beginning. So what were you like growing up, and what were your interests as a child? What kind of led you to have the character that you have?
Oh, I grew up in the north of France in a absolutely normal middle class family. I had a mother who was a teacher, and I had my father was an engineer, and I grew up in a family with, it was not much fun actually, because it was a very tough way to see things and to perceive things, and no time to play, no time for fun, no time for games. It was always studying literature, lately, and politics. My mother was a local elected person in the little city we're living in. My grandfather was also someone who acted for the common good. So obviously it was more like dedicating one's life to others rather than being quite selfish,
So I see. So they were a strong influence in who you became in your character. I understand that now. So what were you interested in as a child? Literature and politics, or did you have your own likes and dislikes?
No, I wanted to be an athlete. I did lots of sports as a young girl, and lots of things. I from swimming to dancing to soccer. I mean, what we call soccer in the US, football in Europe.
Football, yes.
I did loads of things, and running and etc. Unfortunately, I had a problem. One of my knees had a major surgery, so unfortunately, sport for me was over. But somehow, it's to go back to the subject of who I am. Sports obviously develops skills of team spirit, because if you are selfish, obviously then the team makes you pay for your ego-centered personality. So it develops your body, but also your mind, because
of course, and determination. I think sports gives you determination, discipline, good work ethic in a way, because it takes a very disciplined person to perform athletics. And especially to want to pursue that.
Absolutely. So and then I studied languages, as you said. So I studied English, German, and Spanish, and I thought I would have been a German teacher. However, I can't remember exactly how it happened, but by age 20, 21, I lived in England, and I lived a little bit in the US as well. And somehow my life was more like going straight to work, and I started as an assistant, and then I went to what's called public relations, marketing, but operational marketing with VIP events. And I worked in a football club, which is obviously a big event on a weekly basis. So working with the media, working with journalists, working for a brand. And when I was hired at UBS almost 20 years ago, this was my mission, to develop the brand in France, where the bank was opening.
I see. And so what was your position when you first started with the company?
A PR, marketing and communication manager. It's always been my title at UBS. I spent 12 years. This was my mission.
Mm-hmm. And they entertained you and made and piqued your interest in wining and dining. Is that what you did? Maybe you can give us a little bit of history or explain what you did on a daily basis, or what your job description entailed.
Well, I was in charge of marketing and communication, which meant that the bank, which opened their offices in France in 1999, was almost unknown. As you know, we have a border with Switzerland and France, and obviously the regions next to the border, such as what we call Rhône-Alpes, by Lyon or by Strasbourg in the northeast, the people in this region know UBS. UBS stands for Union Bank of Switzerland. And the rest of the country, the bank was totally unknown. So this is what marketing is for. It's to develop a brand for people to, when they were thinking about private banking, they would be thinking of UBS instead of thinking of a French bank or an American bank. So developing the brand was namely in terms of, publications, media interviews for the general managers and the CEO. And it was also a huge budget allocated to VIP events. And my main, most of my days were dedicated to develop those platforms, to invite potential clients, obviously rich, wealthy clients, because UBS, as I said before, deals with wealth management, and to make sure that those clients would open their accounts with UBS and not with a competitor. Because after opening their offices in Paris, where I was hired, then the bank developed open subsidiaries all over the country, from Lyon to Lille, from Marseille to Bordeaux, from Nantes to Strasbourg, and cover the whole country. Remember that 20 years ago, their aim was to be within the 3 first players in France. And 20 years later, I think that it was not exactly what had been planned that happened, because this story is terrible. The whistleblowing at UBS is really terrible in terms of their image. And as you know, brand is what makes people buy a product. If they have a choice between product A and product B, they will definitely go to the company that doesn't have a bad image or problems with the justice and problems on an international scale, which is nowadays the problem with UBS.
And when you were entertaining these clients, you must have heard that Swiss banks were a good place to keep your money safe, and that tax evasion was part of it. You had heard that prior to your position?
The first part of the sentence, absolutely, to keep your money safe. But I never heard in 12 years at UBS, I never heard the words tax evasion, fraud, money laundering, etc., etc. I have never heard that. This is what I talked to the people at the Ministry of Finance when they called me as of 2011. I was in the middle of something that I would never have suspected. So my job on a daily basis was to be outside the office. I was barely at my desk because after, as I said before, opening Paris, they opened all these subsidiaries all over the country. So I was managing events. One day here, the following day there. I was in between planes and trains, and I was seeing more airports and hotel rooms than I was seeing my children. So as I was never at the bank, and I was always running to make sure that the clients would be treated me nicely, because somehow my job, but it was the same when I was working for other companies, was to make sure that, the brand would be represented properly. Because if you invite a client, let's say, to a tennis game or a football game, a rugby game, if you invite them to an evening at the opera, and the client is extremely satisfied with the quality of the reception, the quality of the event, etc., etc., it's obviously a window of what he can expect in terms of how his money is going to be managed. So I was running from one place to another, making sure that my colleagues, the bankers, were happy with what I was offering their clients or potential clients. But then I didn't know at all anything behind that. So somehow during 9 years, I had this job where I was running from a place to another. Everyone knew me. And I was working with my marketing colleagues, whether they were located in Spain or anywhere else on the planet. And these women, because most of the time marketing and communication people are women, so my colleagues had the same job as mine, and we were sharing our experience, and we were helping each other because we were working for an international banks, but none of us were involved in the financial part of the banking industry.
So you were unaware. When you were meeting with potential clients, they never brought it up, that was something they were interested in doing?
No, never. And this is what's very interesting, because secrecy is a word that the meaning of which I understood afterwards, after blowing the whistle. What is secrecy for? What does it serve? What's behind this word? And this is it. With bank secrecy, obviously, you can hide tax evasion, namely money laundering. And this past 10 years, we have heard all these massive banking scandals all over the world. And what has been identified is that this was just possible, the trusts, foundations, etc. It was just possible because of bank secrecy.
So that's interesting.
Secrecy means opacity. And what's behind opacity is impunity. We had this scandal here in France 4 years ago with the minister of budget himself fighting tax evasion, who was having an offshore bank account at UBS Geneva. So when you reach this level of secrecy, of opacity, and when you have a minister lying at the Assemblée Nationale, so it's a Congress here, who lies with so much impunity, it really means that all this has been created to defend a few players against citizens. It's absolutely terrible, because this is what I discovered after blowing the whistle at UBS. Yeah.
You know, the whole side that you were unaware of. You were busy just marketing, busy and keeping a brand and in trying to cast the bank in the best light. And little did you know the underworld and the secrecy that went on behind books and closed doors.
Yeah, it was a shock, and 10 years later, it still is. You know, to have been an executive who was doing her job with passion and with passion, and I was someone who was skilled, and I was someone who really loved my job. So I still have this treason feeling, like I was abused because I didn't know what was behind. And it's terrible, because when you see how tax evasion has created so much poverty, because we know that the analyses made all over the world show those figures were absolutely incredible. If the richest were paying their share part, the middle class and our countries would be in a better shape. It's terrible.
Billions. Who knows how much money has not been paid? How long do you think it's been going on? Probably since the beginning of USB, I would imagine.
Well, UBS was created a little bit less than 200 years ago. It's the biggest bank in Switzerland, and so it's one of the most beautiful, most powerful players on the planet. But it was created, and then it merged and merged and merged. And this is the problem of banks. You've heard this sentence saying too big to jail, and this is exactly it. They are more powerful than countries now. So
definitely. They control everything. I really believe that these banks just control everything. It's quite unbelievable when you start to investigate these topics and work with other journalists who do the same. It's money. Money controls the world, as they say.
Yeah, but it's worse than that, because it could be at least clean money. But with all these tax paradises and tax evasion, we have understood that, it was money laundering for the money of drug dealers and many very dirty businesses. And because of this opacity and secrecy, the banks obviously are the key player, number one, And when you fight a bank, and this is what whistleblowing within banks is, when you fight a bank, you obviously are the one to be eliminated. And namely in Switzerland, all the whistleblowers or the ones involved in banking issues have gone to jail. All the ones who try to go against finance in Switzerland are in very big trouble.
And so let's go back a little bit or let's focus on exactly what happened, what caused you to blow the whistle. Because I understand in 2008, you were requested by a manager to delete content on a hard drive for concerns. Because I believe it was about 2007 when Bradley Birkenfeld, who I've interviewed about 2 months ago, his story had gotten out, and he had gone to the U.S. government and disclosed information, and billions of dollars had been evaded here in the United States as far as tax paying. And so I wonder if that was the catalyst and the concern of your manager, because this became huge. From what I understand, it changed the laws and the rules everywhere. So I wonder if that was the catalyst.
Well, there have been many things. So obviously this story with Bradley Birkenfeld in the US was public, and the media all were talking about that. And what happened in Paris, so it was exactly 10 years ago, the office of the general manager was searched, and on June the 25th, so exactly 10 years ago, June 25th, 2008, my manager entered my office and asked me to delete the content of computer files, namely all the files that were linked to the events I had created since I was at the bank, which were the names of the client and lots of details concerning who they were, linked to the name of a banker, either in France and or in Switzerland. And as I was busy organizing a golf tournament, I did not really pay attention to this instruction to delete my files. However, I asked questions about the search, and I never got any except comply with what I'm asking you to do.
So when you ask these questions, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I was just going to ask, when they asked these questions of you and you weren't getting answered, the alarm bells must have been going off. What were you thinking when you knew that something was suspicious?
Well, I asked questions about the search, who was searching the office of the general manager and what for. But at the same time, I felt that my manager somehow was, putting the pressure on me, and I was wondering what could be the link between the search in the office of the general manager and my job and me and my personality. Or I really did not understand anything except that they wanted somehow to get rid of me. I thought that was the problem, but I didn't know why. And then she came back. I mean, it was a woman. She came back the days after and the weeks after, really pushy, saying that I also had to delete the content of my paper archives to empty the covers. And I was like, but what's going on? What can be so important? Why do they want me to get rid of my working tool? Why do they want me to get rid of my memory? I've been at the bank for almost 9 years. Everyone knows me. I suddenly had a new boss being hired, and this woman enters in my office and asks me to get rid of my work. But it's as if somehow I had never existed. And so maybe it's my personality. I have no idea, but I was so stressed by the way she was talking to me, that I started talking to people at the bank because everyone knew me. And this is how the whistleblowing starts. It's I had colleagues, bankers, who themselves had their own problems with their hierarchy, who explained to me that my job was not only to represent the brand. And this is where I started asking questions for months. So what I'm going to summarize now took me more than 6 months to get the information and to understand it properly.
Oh, so it took much longer than I realized. So like 6 months back and forth and trying to understand and get to the bottom of these requests.
Yeah, because I had never heard the word tax evasion. I'd never heard about fraud. I'd never heard about money laundering, and I had never seen anything. So I was like extremely shocked to understand that my job as a marketing and communication manager was to offer the possibility to French clients, French wealthy clients, to open non-declared bank accounts in Switzerland, because obviously you could have a bank account in Switzerland and declare the money. And if people open a bank account in Switzerland, I thought it was what you said earlier. It was for the money to be secure, but it's for the money to be secure and non-declared. I think it's more than 90% of the money in Switzerland that's not declared. So first I was shocked because the bank used me. It's a betrayal. They used me because I was not a banker, because I'd never worked in a bank in my life. With Birkenfeld, it's very different because he was a banker. And himself, I mean, I remember him saying a couple of years ago in the media that he was hiding diamonds in a toothpaste when he was traveling.
I was going to bring that up. He told me bizarre stories, and he knew what he was doing.
But this is exactly it. It means like, but I've never done anything like this in my life. And if I had asked to do so, I would never have done it. So to come back to what happened in France is like, okay, I understand that somehow I have helped bankers to make lots of money and to open offshore bank accounts. And I understand it's illegal. Mm-hmm. So I understood that I had been taken at risk. I understand that the bank somehow had made fun of me, had lied to me. But then the next question was like, but now what do I do? I have information I didn't have before. If I ever had known that UBS France would have helped clients to, open offshore bank accounts, thanks to me or thanks to my job, but I would obviously never had taken that. Of course not. Mm-hmm. I would never have accepted this. So once I understood, so it was like October, November 2008, after a couple of months discussing with bankers, well, I blew the whistle to the HR manager, the CEO, the head of legal and compliance, to general manager as well. I met them individually. They all told me that I was tired, that I was making up a whole story, that I was not really efficient anymore, that they were wondering why I was not getting on well with my boss, that no one had ever asked me to delete any files, that I had made up a whole story. Anyway, it was just putting the pressure on me, and the pressure was so high that I went through a depression. I'm so
sorry. Can I stop you for a second?
Sure.
When this was going on, you were confiding in others close to you, people outside, obviously, of your work. What was the advice people were giving you? Were they telling you not to do this? And also, did you sit on the information did you want to think about it? Did you ever, with your personality, I doubt you were ever maybe on the fence about this position, but were people around you advising you to do differently?
Well, I was already a single mother 10 years ago, so I had no husband to talk to or no boyfriend to talk to.
Right.
I was home. I was raising my kids, and this was a real problem in my story. My kids were 5 and 14 years old by that time. Mm-hmm. And I was like, but, I'd worked for 20 years and I've never had any problems. And suddenly you have something like this falling, on your shoulders, on your head. And it's a real shock because how can someone like me with my position discover something that had been hidden from the middle class, but also had never been put publicly in the media? Because then I had all these people saying to me, but everyone had known. And said, how come? And everyone had known. Where are the authorities? When you're a bank in our country, and I guess it's the same in the US, you have to refer to the banking authorities. How come had everything been so hidden from everyone? Mm-hmm. And somehow blowing the whistle at UBS is somehow also blowing the whistle on a system that just supports banks for the advantage of a little group that do not care about the rules. As I said before, we had the Minister of Budget here in France who said he was fighting tax evasion and who himself has his offshore accounts at UBS in Switzerland, at Geneva. And so how can you trust them? So what happened to me 10 years ago is like, first I was awfully stressed, and then I was panicked because I thought I could be taken to jail, that I was I could be the accomplice of those illegal activities, of these wrongdoings. So what I did after talking to the managers was to talk to a lawyer and also to talk to the Ministry of Work. Ministry of Work in France is an important minister. And, well, I was told that I had to fill in a complaint against the bank, which I did. And then UBS was under investigation and some of their managers as well. But, you know, in the US, the UBS file was judged in a year, and UBS signed an agreement in the amount of a little bit less than 1 billion US dollars in 2009. But in France, my story has been lasting for 10 years. UBS is supposed to go to court at the end of the year, and then maybe they will appeal, and maybe there will be a second appeal. And in 2025, the French justice might judge illegal activities of a bank that took place between year 2002 and 2008. Doesn't make sense. We do not have a justice working the way the US does.
With that kind of money, they can pay anybody to do anything. They could pay a lawyer to write laws and rules. But one thing I wanted to go back just a little bit, weren't you frightened for your life? You're dealing with this powerful entity, and you know people die all the time or murdered for these type of disclosures and this type of whistleblowing. So were you frightened I know you were frightened of being, of going to jail or prison. Were you frightened for your life, I guess is my question.
Well, it's an interesting question, actually, because 10 years ago, I was not, because I thought that the Ministry of Work would protect me. Then I had inspectors civil servants from the Ministry of Finance who asked me to give them information. And this lasts for more than a year, and I was still an executive at the bank. So I also thought that those people would protect me. And then the media talked about the UBS case. So I obviously thought it would also protect me. But then when UBS made me redundant, it's more than 6 years ago now, 6.5 years ago, I thought that because I was an executive and I was skilled and I was honest, I would obviously find a job because, I had an experience and I was reliable. And this is where things go really wrong, is that in our country, in France, which is the so-called country of human rights, saying the truth, being a honest person, when you fight such a powerful bank, means being
ostracized and blacklisted.
Well, yeah, you're the black sheep, the five-legged sheep. And this is the most dangerous part. And then when I met a lawyer, and the one who helped me to write the complaint against UBS, he's the one who really scared me. He said, well, when you take the tube in Paris, do not walk too close to the tracks, And I was like,
he knew. Yeah, I'm sure that was frightening for you to understand just how dirty, because it seemed like in some ways you were very innocent. So it must have been frightening for you to hear that from him.
And then it's a process that starts, which gets worse and worse. It means like your mobile phone, for example, does not work properly. People call you and they can never reach you. You can never, receive the text messages sent from your children. You have problems at home with your own telephone lines, but also with internet.
Computers, yes, all of it.
You receive an email and it's duplicated 25 times, and then you receive emails that are already been, opened. And this is a process that starts, and, it's made to scare you. So obviously, somehow I started being extremely nervous. But again, I thought that, I would be protected by France. I would be protected by the administration. And then I really thought that the justice would be fair. would be ethical. Because what happened is that UBS took me to court in 2010. It was the first time in my life I went to French court. I was petrified. Then I went to court 2 or 3 times. And my first book, the one you mentioned earlier, is also, a reason for UBS to have taken me to court last year, because they complained that it's a defamation for their image. So it's a story that has no end, never endless, it never stops. So obviously the problems today are not the ones I had to face this past 10 years for many different reasons. However, it's true that what makes a person's life is a family, a job, obviously money, and a social life. So obviously, when you have no job anymore, everything around you collapses, because family is complicated, especially when you are a mother and you have no incomes anymore, and people, like colleagues and friends, after a while, turn their backs, because this is complicated for them to understand, Can you imagine? 10 years is a very long period of time.
And it's so unfortunate, because that's when you need the support of your friends and family and your colleagues. I see that happen all the time. I speak to whistleblowers quite often, and it's saddening to me that this happens to people who are trying to do the right thing. But many times, as I mentioned in my intro, it creates needed change. It changes everything, and it reinstills integrity into whatever the person may be whistleblowing. And people in my country, there's people that look at you as a hero. That's how I found out about you.
Everyone talks about the courage of whistleblowers. Everyone, in the media, namely, we can read heroes or pariahs. Well, I doubt we are any of that. All the people I can talk to here in Europe and also in the US, they all said that they did what they had to do.
Exactly. You weren't thinking about it. You were doing what you had to do. You had no other option other than to be honest and to disclose this information, or not to be bullied into doing things you knew that you felt were wrong.
Well, honestly, I don't know anymore, because somehow whatever the whistleblowing is, it's always about corruption. Behind this word is everything, because whether you supply food that's not good for your clients, or whether you encourage your clients to do tax evasion, what hides behind that is just corruption. So who enjoys this? Who? Well, so all the time the whistleblowers are being perceived as people who are either, nasty or selfish, or
ironically, although there are sometimes, just to quickly interject here, sometimes someone becomes angry with someone at the company, and so they, for the wrong reasons, they go to disclose information, but that's few and far between.
But it's not whistleblowing then.
Not really, but they will call themselves that, which is interesting.
Because whistleblowing is just to act in the general interest and for the common good. It's nothing to do with,
revenge, retaliation, or anything of that sort. Great. So you weren't getting support, and people kind of turned. Tell me about rebuilding your life, and how did you cope? I know I understand you had depression at the time and all this anxiety. I can only imagine. And you were a single mother.
Well, then it got worse and worse, and even nowadays, I always wonder how it could be worse. And every year is worse than the year before. I remember 2008. I told my kids for Christmas, next year is going to be better, and I said the same in 2009. And then, as I said, 2010, I had to go to court for the first time, and I was still hoping that justice would be ethical and do what they had to do. And year after year, nothing happens, which means that employers do not want to hire people like me just because I'm called Stéphanie Gibaud. If I had another name, another face, I doubt it would have been a problem, because all the ones who go and work for UBS are somehow rewarded by headhunters. There's not a single person on this planet who's worked for UBS and who's unemployed. It's impossible because the criteria at UBS are so high in terms, it's a very demanding company. So headhunters all know. And amazingly, I am the one who cannot work because because I have this name and I have disclosed the fact that, UBS has done so much wrongdoing in our country. So when you realize that headhunters, companies, somehow all are extremely side by side, and that has nothing to do with your skills, but what do you do? It's terrible. So I had to sell all that I had. I sold my jewels, I sold my furniture, I sold my properties, my apartment, and I paid my loans back, at the bank, and that's it. No one can just live in Europe with just air to clean our lungs. We all need money to work and to feed our children. So
online it said they did pay you a fine for the harassment. Was that true?
I was paid 30,000 euros for the harassment I suffered, and
won't get you far, I understand, but
and my legal costs were 35,000.
Oh, I didn't understand that. My goodness, unbelievable, extraordinary.
Well, but this is how it works. When you have gone through that process, people will tell you. So, what did you go to court for harassment? It's this is the price. 30,000 is the price maximum, and you have the lawyers making you think that you're gonna make much more money, and somehow it's a business. Everything about whistleblowing nowadays is a business. It's a business for lawyers. It's a business for politicians. It's a business for many people. But I can tell you that there is absolutely no one nowadays in Europe helping whistleblowers. It's not true. The one who would tell you that there are laws that protect, it's wrong. The law exists, but no one is protected by the laws. It's as crazy and as mad as it seems. They all talk, all of them, but no one does anything. Otherwise, all the whistleblowers who are in my situation would have found a job in a ministry, in an administration, etc., etc. There is no sign from the top level for things to change, and it really means that corruption is everywhere. This is terrible.
Yeah, it is. It's a corrupt world. It's unfortunate, but I do see people coming forward more and more these days, even though they see, like Edward Snowden became so famous in the United States, and people, you know how people are. They see a person do something and then they all decide they're going to do it too. So a lot of people are coming forward, even though he is now ostracized and living in Russia, and if he comes back here, he will be prosecuted. So I do see some shift, but it's such our world is so polarized. The bad are really bad and the good are really good now. It's really interesting what a polarized world we live in.
I think that in people's mind, there is no education about what courage is. I think that as of school, as of day one, we should all teach one should all teach the children of the world, whether they are in China, in Russia, in Japan, in the US, in Chile, or in Zimbabwe, or in France. One should teach the kids about what courage is, because as soon as someone is courageous, as soon as someone tells the truth, unfortunately, he or she is ostracized. And women, most of the time, are being labeled crazy. All of us. are suddenly crazy. We make up stories. We are in our middle 40s, so somehow we
Too
are
emotional. Yes.
and men,
Hormones.
they all have a problem with sex. And you see it, for example, with Julian Assange. I talked to an Australian journalist a month ago, and I said, "But how is Assange perceived by the by the Aussies?" And she says to me something extremely interesting. She said he had a lot of support until the story with the potential rapes in Sweden happened. Then he lost credibility. So what are we talking about here? You see, all the time it's like this. It's always like making up stories.
I was going to say, they're probably false claims. Most people believe or have researched it and believe that these are false claims to discredit him. We know these tactics.
Absolutely. This is the big problem we face. It means like people, many people are not informed properly. So then it's very easy for the game players to win.
Definitely so. And so you decided to write your experiences in books. And do you want to talk about your books a little bit? And also let's talk a little bit about any plans that you may have. Maybe you're living more just day to day with maybe no projected plans into the future. But I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Oh, well, I was not ready for this question. Well, my first book was published 4 years ago, and it's my story, what happened. So somehow it's all the details of what we've been discussing for less than an hour now. And I published a couple of months ago a book about what it takes to be a whistleblower. Because I thought that my case was somehow very peculiar, because it's bank, because it's UBS, because it's me. I don't know. So I met lots of whistleblowers in the administration, in the food industry, and medical industry, etc., in France, and all the ones who stood against their companies, ex-employers, all have suffered what whistleblowers say in terms of retaliation, in terms of justice, which is not ethical nor fair. And I was like, but how do our neighbors, Italy, Spain, Germany, Switzerland, which is a neutral country, where all the headquarters of international organizations are based, namely international associations as well. And what I heard from all those people, because I interviewed something like 50 whistleblowers, freezes our blood. It's absolutely terrible. In Switzerland, most of them go to jail, but in all the countries it's the same. It's bad-mouthing, it's ostracizing, it's people are harassed, they lose their jobs. After losing their job, they lose their house, they lose their money, their families, their kids are in danger. And I was like, but what happens in the UK and in the US? Because you have whistleblowing in your constitution. And you mentioned Bradley Birkenfeld earlier, who made 104 million euros when he left prison. However, if you look at all the whistleblowers from the NSA, the FBI, the CIA, people like Thomas Drake, it's
Bill Binney,
terrible, because they fear, and Chelsea Manning, they fear prison sentences, and they are bankrupt because it costs a fortune for them to go to court. And it's a big lie, because the ones who support, the associations, when you talk to them, they always refer to the US and to the UK. However, this is where the worst cases have been identified under the two mandates of President Obama. So I wrote this book, and it's going to be translated into English before the end of summer. Because I think that enough is enough. It's enough lies. UBS lied to me. So lying to me, it was lying to my children. But above my little case, it is lying to, the French citizens. It's lying to all the workers who have problems in making ends meet. And it's lying on an international level, because what UBS did in the US, it did it in France, it did it in Spain, in Italy, in Germany, in England, in Belgium, in Greece, in Turkey. It did it all over the world. And what the other whistleblowers have mentioned in their own industry happened in France, in Switzerland, in South America, in Asia, everywhere. So we have no other choice nowadays to stand up together, united, because, politicians are very good at that, and the justice as well, saying, well, this is our country and these are the rules. But when you are in a different country, there are different rules and different politicians. And they tell you that, in France, there's the best law ever that protects whistleblowers. But what we say here, it's not true, because all the whistleblowers I know are not protected by this law. It's just something that makes the system continue. And to keep up going. So who enjoys that? Who enjoys that crime? I wrote in 2013, I wrote to the DOJ, Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., as a French citizen. And I explained what was going on here. And by that time, we had this number 3 at UBS, who was about to face court, and who was also deeply involved in our stories here. I've never been listened to by the Department of Justice. And why not? All the information I had could have been extremely useful for you, American citizens, because, as I said earlier in this conversation, UBS had to pay a fine of less than $1 billion to the United States. But how come? Because we all know that the assets of the US wealthy American were 6 times more than what it was here. And here UBS may face a 5 billion euro fee. So it really means that if our justices were working, together, it would serve the interest of citizens.
Mm-hmm. We just have a few more minutes. Just wanted to let you know.
Okay.
Yeah, it makes plausible sense what you were trying to do.
Well, so what I just mean is that I wrote the second book just for all of us citizens, to stand united and defend our own rights. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for things to change for the future generations. Because this is the point. What's the point of whistleblowing if things do not change? What has changed for the banks this past 10 years? As you know, we all had to pay when the banks were bankrupt in 2008.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But when the banks make profits, they just make profits for their shareholders, not for the citizens. The citizens have a debt to reimburse. But who signed for that? Did we? Obviously, we did not. So what are we giving the future generations if we do not take care of the problems, and if we're unable to be listened to by the people we elect? There is so much to say about the links that our politicians have developed with the bankers here in Europe, but also in the US. President Obama himself was playing golf with Robert Wolf. Robert Wolf was the chairman of UBS Americas. Everything is like this. It's extremely connected.
Mm-hmm. You woke up one day because of this process. You started to see what really how the world works, and therefore you realize now that we have to change it.
And it's such a shame, but we all think we are extremely isolated, and somehow we are not. We just have to connect. We are little dots and we just have to connect. And thanks to the internet, nowadays we can know what happens in your country and what happens in any other country in the world. And we all say the same. Every citizen suffers, wherever he is located, whatever he says, is not being listened to. I mean, it's the big conclusion in Europe anyway, and I am not a fortune teller. I don't know what's going to happen, but for sure, some people will have to pay for their wrongdoings and for their lies.
We the people, we're heading out now. Can you please give your website and let people know how to purchase your books?
I think my books are going, my second book in English is going to be on Amazon as of when it's published, end of August, beginning of September. Otherwise, people can write to me. My website is StéphanieGibaud.org.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this interview. Take care of yourself and be safe and stay strong. And I hopefully will get a chance to speak to you soon.
Be the greatest night of our lives.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
You're going to let it be the worst.
It was perfect.
And I guarantee you, we won't go by in your life.
Yeah,
you won't regret
you too.
walking out, letting them get the best of it.